And we are live.
Woo!
Howdy, Twitch. This is Brandon and Steven back again for episode 4 of Save vs. Bourbon. Tonight we're going to... Whoa, sorry, what?
I said woohoo!
Yeah, tonight we're going to be talking about the exact opposite of what we were talking about 2 weeks ago. That this episode is the best characters we've ever made, and we're going to go further than that. We're going to talk about how you make a good character. We're going to talk about what makes a good character. We're going to talk about why a character works in one situation when it would not work in another.
I am excited.
I am also excited. So we're gonna do the housekeeping stuff first. So as always, I'm Brandon. I've been major tabletop and freeform role player for probably 15 years now.
And I am the one referred to as Steven, and a similar amount of time, kind of, sort of, maybe a little bit. It's hard to keep track at this point.
He tends to be a player, I tend to be a game master, and together we have quite a bit of experience in tabletop and in just role-playing in general. Format for tonight, Steven and I are going to talk about, well, there's going to be story time, and there's going to be discussion, and anyone who wishes to be part of the discussion, you can always type right in that chat room right there. I am reading the chat right this moment, and if you make a point, I will read it out, and we will respond to it.
You're not too late, Phoebe. Welcome to the show.
Indeed. As always, if you want to be part of the program, you can message me. We will take, let's say, call-ins if anyone's interested. If not, Steven and I are perfectly happy to sit here and talk about stuff.
We will noodle until the bourbon runs out.
Yes, we will bourbon until the noodle runs dry.
Also acceptable.
Yes. So I think I want to open with some story time, and I don't know who wants to go first here. Do you want to go first with story time?
I can go first with story time.
I usually go first, but I think if you want to, we can change it up.
No, it's fine. Absolutely fine. And looks like Phoebe is game to join and talk with us about characters as well when we get through our initial story time. So, yes, of course, Phoebe, just let us know when you're ready to go. I suppose for starters, that should harken back to our previous conversation about the worst characters we ever made. And
yes.
For the people who were here for that particular episode, you may remember me mentioning how for the long period of time, and also essentially because he's alive, my character, Stephen Bladearm, was one of the only characters I played for a long time. And as such, I had a long time to develop and think out things. And it really wasn't till we were in essentially the role play where me and Brandon and most of us met in Crossroads where I started developing better characters. And around that time, I made a couple of different characters that were much more interesting than Bladearm. I remember Owen. God, I can't remember his last name. He was a stereotypical dwarf, but he may have been one of my most fun characters to actually make. You remember Owen, don't you, Brandon?
Was he a dwarf?
He was a dwarf, yes.
Yeah, so I never really interacted with Owen. Would you tell us more about it?
So Owen was probably either my second or third character I made after everything fell apart with after Bladearm started going downhill. And there really wasn't anything particularly special about him. He was a stereotypical dwarf. He worked in the mountains. He ended up in this interdimensional realm and was just a dwarf doing dwarfy things. But what made the character interesting was it was one of the first times that I just played the character regardless of my feelings with the character. I love the character, but I just let the character have a life of its own, and it started factoring in with me with one particular scene where I forget who all was involved. I think there's two other characters, and then the big bad for this particular arc was a witch of some sort that had cursed the room and giving no with nothing else really to do after he'd been pissed off. The dwarf just charged, and granted, like I said, that doesn't sound like much, but at the time I was struggling with playing a character as opposed to trying to act as if the character was, and he was less a special snowflake that I didn't want anything to happen to. And he just charged this witch, and he may have ended up, as he was swinging his axe around wildly, removing the artificial limb of another character.
Oh, I think I remember this now.
So it was, a first attempt of me playing a character and making a character that was an actual character and not just a list of powers and, ultra, Mary Sue stylings.
A character with an actual mind of their own.
Yes, exactly. So I was like around the point where I started making, better characters and more characters. And I made a couple others. There's one I really need to find the info for because the backstory was really, really cool. There's no Ultra Edge.
I mean, no, there was no Ultra Edge.
Not with the dwarf, with other characters, yes.
Oh, yeah.
But, so that was my first time. Well, probably wasn't the first time. The first time in recent, I can actually remember making a character that was a decent, good character. Just kind of starting out a little light here and building up to the better and better characters I made.
Right. And it does teach us an important lesson, and that's that a character can be kind of standard, a dwarf with an axe, and still be good.
Yeah, exactly.
It's about just letting the character have their own life and not putting too much of yourself in the character. And there's other ways you can go about that. There's other ways you can make a character that feels natural, feels real, and that's something important, I think, for the for just the concept of making a good character for any setting.
Right. I don't know if many people went bowling and they remember their first time going bowling when they were a small child, and perhaps after that, the bumpers they put up in the lane so you wouldn't, roll a gutter ball every single time. Yeah, exactly. Researching lockpicking for a rogue is, well... Oh, yeah. That makes sense. Like, how to actually pick lockpick. Yeah, that makes absolute sense. Doing something like that, if it fits in the character, it's a rogue. A rogue should understand how to do that. But if you look into and know the rules and the setting and how to actually pick a lock, you can get more in depth with your character and you can put a mindset behind your character's actions.
Right, because picking a lock's actually a kind of tedious and time-consuming process.
Granted, no rogue really worth their salt doesn't know how to pick a lock. But then again, 95% of any character in RPGs can pick up the lock picking skill, whether it's the largest freaking barbarian with sausage fingers or a tiny sprite that can barely lift the lockpick itself.
Right.
In various games. But when you're role playing that character, if you know how it works, then you can say, well, my character has fingers that don't necessarily work for picking this lock in this certain way, so I'll have to do it this way to account for it.
Right, and even like in a tabletop sense, while you're sitting around taking 10 on a lock, because why would you ever roll? While you're sitting around taking 10 on a lock, you got to think about what your character's actually doing. Like, you're kind of concentrating. So
right.
If you're in a tabletop situation where you're trying to pick this lock and maybe some role plays going on while you're trying to pick the lock, you can work the actual quality of the lock picking into what's going on. So you can say, "Will you people shut up? I'm trying to concentrate," is something you might say.
Or if you fail the roll, you're just like, hey, fuck it, barbarian, kick the door in.
Right. It's about like how your character responds to what is really a pretty tedious process.
As for your comment about taking 10 on a lockpick, that works absolutely fine unless you're my character, which the various rogues I've played have usually ended up in situations where they have to, let's say, pick a lock to keep the party from being swarmed by goblins, or which brings me to a bit of a story. So story time with Stove, if you don't mind. A bit of a tangent.
Go ahead with story time.
So there was a campaign. I believe Rail may have mentioned it before. Shout out to Distorted Truth in the chat, who's been one of my partners in crime in various tabletop games for a long time now. We were playing a session. I forget the specific loadout. I think he was playing. This was in 3.5 D&D. I believe he was playing a Tome of Battle. I think the class was Crusader, and then we had other friend Donnie. He was playing Sorcerer. So just in a situation where we were about to get flooded with by orcs or goblins in a bad situation, and my rogue just while combat's going on in the side, he goes off, finds his door, and picks the lock, and goes off on his own little adventure and splits the party. No, I think you were Crusader because Warblade came the next. I'm not referring to the Sword Coast game. This is the one where it was Donner and my guy went off on a little adventure on the side path and crossed this bridge and managed to trick these 4 orcs to wander into this cavern with a bridge and drop the bridge and basically drop them into a pit of snakes. So it was awesome. Then it was something, slightly roguish to do, but it goes against the standard operating procedure for most adventuring parties, and it split the party for about 10 rounds. But it was fun, and it, completely fit within the idea of the character. Like, this is a rogue who cannot, have a stand-up fight with all these people. So he's going to try to find an alternate path, and if he can escape, great. If he can lead his comrades through, great. That means more meat shields.
Right, yeah. That lateral thinking that you take for granted because, well, it's not very often that a party actually has someone who does that sort of thing. You tend to play D&D as a turn-based tactics game. You don't think about like dropping.
Can we set this up? Dropping a bridge on them. I mean, of course, you got the whole preparing the battlefield thing, but
right.
That really depends on how good your stealth checks are and your perception to spot the enemy.
Yeah,
I believe we've tried to set things up like that before, like grease trapping the floor and drawing them out and setting up archers, but. In the games like D&D or Pathfinder or, even things like Dark Heresy or Only in War or, take your game choice. It really comes down to what the dice gods and Nuffle lets you get away with. And if you've pissed off Nuffle, you're not going to be able to accomplish this big complex plan. So lateral thinking, as great as it is still tempered by an amount of having to understand your limitations as a character.
Well, you got to have a respect for the dice system at any rate.
Well, yeah, you have to. But, it's, the old saying is no plan survives contact with the enemy. If you factor that into any kind of tabletop game, no plan survives contact with the enemy or Nuffle.
Oh, we will have an episode about turn-based tactics, so don't get me wrong. I just haven't had a chance I haven't had a chance to drop on the charts.
I imagine we'll have to have a 8 o'clock start for that, and it'll probably go till 2 o'clock in the morning because it's me and you.
Y'all aren't ready for turn-based tactics. All right, so I'm going to talk about something. Actually, I'm going to talk about something that's kind of important to the making a good character, right? And it's a bit related to the dwarf story, because the lesson, and I'm going to tell the moral of the story first. The moral of the story is that when you make a character, you gotta commit. You make a theme. You design a character around that theme. And one way to make a really compelling, really interesting character is just take that theme entirely too far.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, the character that I'm referring to is from the same freeform RP that the dwarf he was talking about is from. His name was Rickert of the Church of Deals.
Oh God, Rickert.
Yes. So, in D&D terms, standard D&D terms, Rickert was a cleric. But those of you who've played Magic the Gathering will be familiar with a Church of Deals. But it wasn't Orzhova. This was actually a completely different Church of Deals. I just had used the name because it sounded good.
It also completely fit with the character.
Yeah. So, the character was a cleric of the concept of capitalism.
So this could go one of two ways for people who are not familiar with the character. This can either go straight up a standard cleric with, who worships capitalism and the deal, or you could just take it the alternate way and just imagine a caricature of what the Russians believe the Americans were during the Cold War.
And he was a delightful combination of both of those things.
Yes, he fucking was.
So, for example, he had all your standard cleric powers. He could heal by, touching people with his hands. He could do the standard cleric spells. He could turn undead. He could do all that good stuff. But he was not allowed to do any of that on his own behalf, and he was not allowed to do any of that without being paid.
So one could almost say that he had a few levels of rogue mixed into there somewhere.
Oh, probably, but it was a necessity. It was part of his rule set that he could not cast any cleric spells without being paid fair market value.
Which is absolutely amazing and hilarious.
Of which part of it had to be tithed to the church, obviously. Obviously, you got to tithe. And the rest he had to keep.
Oh, and this comes into even more hilarious effect when you realize that this entire setting is at the time, depending on the rule set for the area, it was a no magic setting. It could go up to full magic or full tech depending on what was going on at the time, due to a system we call the Doom Bells. But by and large, when he's on the island, Rickert doesn't have any of these abilities.
Right. No, yeah, he had none of those powers. Other things he didn't have while on the island was he had a holy sword. You remember the holy sword?
I remember the holy sword.
Yes, he had a holy sword that was blessed by capitalism and had the unique ability to treat an enemy's armor based on how expensive it is. So, if an enemy was wearing a cheap set of, armor of some kind, just something cheap, something cobbled together in a back alley, the weapon would completely ignore it. But, if the enemy was wearing a silk nightgown, it was useless.
Because of the expense.
Exactly.
Which means a mithril set of full plate in D&D terms would take absolutely no damage. In fact, that might actually even break the fucking sword.
Right. And Rickert, to go along with this holy weapon that he had, also had a suit of this bright golden plate armor that just... It was a gorgeous suit. It was expensive as all get out. But Rickert was kind of a fat guy. So you can imagine this suit of armor that's made specifically for this guy who's pretty overweight, like probably bordering on obese, really tall, really strong, but definitely fat. Don't look for Phoebe says Golden Onion Knight. Yes, Golden Onion Knight.
See, until you reminded me that he was fat, I was about to just have the chat or suggest you look up pictures of either the Emperor of Mankind or Custodes, for an example of the armor.
Or Gilgamesh. But, so, he ends up being, like, in a combat situation, he ends up being this fat guy in golden armor swinging around this, like, glowing gemmed sword. and screaming at the top of his lungs a battle hymn to capitalism.
Is it wrong that when you say that, I imagine the backing beat from the choir is just the fucking MIA song Paper Planes?
Pretty
All I want
much.
to do.
No, yeah, that makes perfect sense. That is literally Rickard. And so in normal life, right, when he was on the island, not in a combat situation, because this was a pretty low this ended up being a pretty low combat role play. So in his normal
About
life,
when I had my say in matters.
well, I mean, yes, but so in his normal life, he would just run a shop in the marketplace. It was just that easy. But well, so he had plans on buying out the entire island at some point because, again, capitalism. But
Brandon, did you happen to be watching Log Horizon around the time that this was occurring?
This was before Log Horizon ever came out.
Oh, so they stole the idea from you.
Yes. So he ran his shop. He preached the good word of the deal. He was altogether, actually, okay, for a priest of capitalism, okay, you would assume him to be a ruthless businessman, but he really wasn't. He was, he was generally a pretty nice guy. He just had very specific rules about what things need to be paid for and what constitutes a properly set deal. And he followed those rules with religious fervor because that was, in fact, his religion. But he did have a particular problem anytime anyone threatened his profit margins. So one day, a group of goons from the local gang, I forget what they were.
Which one? There were several.
Well, tried to extort him for some protection money, I guess. I guess that's what was happening. And he just went right off the handle, flipped his own merchant stall, into their faces, and then cut one of them nearly in half while screaming that battle hymn to capitalism I mentioned earlier.
It was a unique
Welcome
setting.
back to the
Coincidentally, I just linked you something.
Oh my god.
Final stretch as competitors
I just linked you something. I want to see
Help,
Rickard
help,
interact
no.
with...
stone players
One
on
second.
Earth. You decided
Okay, my apologies, everybody. My Twitch app started playing an ad, so I had to panic shut that down. We'll edit it out in post. It'll be fine.
Absolutely fine. So I just linked you something. I want to see Rickard interact with that particular SCP.
Oh God.
738.
Oh, this one. Cool. Yeah, we'll talk about we'll have an episode about SCP. Why not?
Fine by me. But anyway, so Rickard was an absolutely hilarious character.
So Rickard cut a guy in half. And I like I said, he was generally a really nice guy. Everyone who interacted with him, he was totally fair dealing, never cheated anybody. Because religiously, he believed that both parties had to benefit from any deal. And, he just had a very specific, very obvious berserk button.
Mess with the prophets.
Mess with the prophets. You see, the church... See, what had happened was, the church had all these writings from the prophets, and they had misunderstood or misspelled it, really, and bad joke.
It was amusing.
No,
I
it
got
wasn't.
it.
But so like I was saying, what I think really worked about that character was the commitment to the premise.
Yeah.
What if you had a D&D cleric whose god was capitalism?
I think that's a distinct possible thing that you can do, and I think it's as hilarious as mentioned.
And I followed it to its logical conclusion.
Logical extreme.
Right. And well, it was definitely extreme. Like I feel like maybe that character could have benefited from actually backing off a little bit. But the end result was a unique character and an interesting character and one who was good for the setting because he wasn't. I mean, clearly he's not a bad guy. He's not exactly a good guy because he religiously cannot do anything you have not paid him for.
Doesn't necessarily, like you said, doesn't make him necessarily bad.
Right, no, yeah. He worked very well in the setting he was in, and he worked very well because it was a unique concept taken to its logical conclusion, I think.
Yeah, and a lot of the characters in that particular RP, that RP I think succeeded as long as it did because it was not a clear-cut good versus evil for an extended period of time. It was a lot of shades of gray. Everybody thought that they were they were in the right and so on and so forth until you get to various characters who shan't be mentioned.
Right. And that works in a free-form kind of setting. Like, I would never have tried to play a character like Rickard on a tabletop. Mostly because the rest of the party would get really annoyed by having to pay him for miracles.
That would be annoying, but it would be hilarious. And I'm worried that Rail might take your suggestion to heart.
I mean, we can talk about some characters.
However, I think at this point, I believe we have a guest.
Ah, yes, that is true. Someone had an interest in talking about one of the characters they made that worked.
Hi. I was on last episode, worst characters ever. I'm Phoebe. Hi.
Yep, Phoebe's back again, here to talk about the best character.
If you keep this up, we're going to have to add you to the freaking pre-roll.
I wouldn't be adverse to that. But I actually have a couple best characters. I know that Darkwood kind of overtook the entirety of my story because I didn't really have anything that matched up to him, but I've got a couple stories for the best characters ever. The first one centers around assassins, and I know that a couple of you might be familiar with a couple of assassins that I've played. But these two was me and my dad's friend, and it was a D&D game that my dad was running. I was really young, and he had an interest in running a campaign, and we said okay. Rolled up a couple humans. We were basically rogues. It was 2nd edition D&D. So it was derpy as hell. And
you played an assassin in 2nd edition D&D?
Well, we were assassin in name, but not in class, right?
Yeah, the assassin prestige class is usually fairly ridiculous to get into, and while hilarious, it has some fairly restricting prereqs.
Right. So we have to make it clear that the character's class was not an assassin. They were functioning they were assassinating someone.
Assassinating was their job, but their classes were Thief and Rogue, Kayaka and Natsu, not Thief and Rogue, but Thief and Fighter, Kayaka and Natsu, respectively. Natsu, the fighter of the group, was kind of the face a little bit, and he had to be. He had to be.
A fighter face is hilarious to me now.
Well, we were a seedy underbelly, We're not going to have somebody like a high-value cleric or somebody leading the party around, or a paladin.
So he got by strictly on his intimidate skill.
Basically. And he kind of had to be the face because his compatriot, Kayaka, my character, happened to be a drunk. And not like the kind of drunk where, oh, my life is so poor, blah, 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 blah. More like the drunk is like, ooh, alcohol. I want to taste that. And then she would get entirely shit-faced and fall underneath the table and just kind of pass out in the middle of negotiations.
So a person who wouldn't actually go amiss on this program.
Yes. And
Hey,
there is one adventure that really stands out to me, just like cements who they are. And there are a couple recurring characters to this campaign, one of which was Lord La Rosa. And his shtick was that he was a noble who got rich, bought his family title, all on the back of this food product he created that was basically a bread disc with tomato sauce on it. Yeah,
Oh
no
my
cheese.
God.
No cheese, no toppings. And this was my dad's world. It was going to be a little bit weird, we knew, but he was slinging pizzas for La Rosa's at the time. So it's like, we just kind of had to look at him for a second. And then we accepted it. But yeah, Lord La Rosa was basically the human lord we most dealt with, and his shtick was using his money to build walls around towns and embetter people's lives with art and culture and music, and basically defend humanity.
who hired assassins?
We didn't work for him.
Oh, no, they were assassinating him.
Oh,
Kind of roundabout. So, our first adventure involving this guy, and Kayaka had done a couple things that were a little bit outside of the box in terms of problem solving, but we found ourselves incredibly broke. And it came down from the guild we were a part of. It was a guild of assassins and everything. We had X's on our hands, for crying out loud.
sounds reasonable.
And it's like, just go rob a bank. And Kayaka looked at Natsu, Natsu looked at Kayaka, and we said, okay. So we start putting these plans together, and it turns out this is one of the banks that Lord La Rosa has amassed quite a bit of his fortune into. So we're going, okay, well, how are we going to get through this? How are we going to go through here? And we go into the bank. We kind of have a generalized plan. Nothing had really come together. We just figured we would slit the throats of anybody we passed on the way up, grab the gold, and jump out. And turns out somebody had already dealt with the guards. All the guards were asleep. And this was a bit of a shell shock. And Kayaka and Natsu go and slit the throats of the guards because they don't want anybody waking up while they're doing this. They don't know how long it's going to fucking take to get into the vault. And, human lives are disposable. So they start going through this bank and they're checking every corner and then feeling stupid because everybody's asleep, and soon after their throats are slit. And we get to the top floor and there's these elves. And all these elves are moving these barrels and wheelbarrows of gold everywhere. And alarms are starting to go off. And they see Kayaka and Natsu and they all start drawing weapons and shit. And they go, well, who the fuck are you? What the fuck are you doing? It's like, we're here to get rich. Kind of like you. We're not here to get rich. Lord La Rosa is building walls around cities and we want those walls to come down. This is our protest. The elves being tree huggers in this world.
Fair enough.
And so we're like, well, the alarms are going off. How are you going to get all the gold out of the building? And the elves stop. And they go, do we have a window? They go look out the window. Turns out that, all the watch guards are out there. And, these are bog standard elves. They know how to fight. But there's a lot of fucking watchmen out there. This is a fortified city. And they go, oh, shit, we didn't think this together, did we? So we're up there and we're thinking about it, and guards are starting to come up from the bottom levels, and they're starting to fight us, and it's a big clusterfuck of us fighting around these wheelbarrows full of gold. And Kayaka's trying to snatch gold, but in the middle of this fight, the elves are still stopping her. It's just getting pissed, and it's like, well, if you don't want it and you won't give it to me, why don't you throw it out the window? So the end scenario is all these elves are emptying wheelbarrows full of gold out the window. Kayaka and Natsu have gotten big bags of money, which is nice. We're still trying to fight the guards while all this is going on. And then Kayaka and Natsu jump out the window with an elf casting Featherfall on us.
Jane, the man they call Jane.
Yeah, that's the one.
But every single adventure with Kayaka and Natsu had like a strict formulaic enterprise, and it was just Natsu gets us into a job goes tits side up because of these fucking elves trying to deal with La Rosa, and Kayaka comes up with some stupid ass plan that gets him out of trouble and no richer.
Sounds like the plot of a primetime show?
It sounds like the fucking plot of Firefly is what it sounds like.
Yeah, that's the one. That's the one. They never get any richer,
I think
not ever.
What I think worked was that, you know, they were built for the setting, which was the setting was kind of, you know, status quo is God. You're always poor. You're always looking for work. And there's always the same recurring characters because this is the part of the world you live in. And Kayaka and Natsu were very much characters built for kind of an action-oriented sitcom.
Where their job was to murder people.
I'd
watch that sitcom.
I mean...
I think I have watched that sitcom.
I know I've watched that sitcom.
I think they call it Lucifer.
That is not a sitcom.
That is a romantic comedy.
I find it funny.
It is?
I like Lucifer. Lucifer is a fun show.
Okay, that is... Okay, I'll take your word for it. We'll talk about that later. Now, that did put me in mind for a great but short-lived character, let's say. Short-lived because one of the people I was playing with got arrested. Long story short.
Okay.
So, this was a D&D game. It was Pathfinder. It was specifically a Pathfinder game that I wasn't running. It was somebody I worked with and her boyfriend and some guy. And we just hung out and played D&D for a couple sessions. But you're all well familiar. Okay, so this is the tale of a character that was good by accident. You're all familiar with my tendency to play a token evil teammate, right?
You play the token evil teammate? Never.
Yeah. I like playing the token evil teammate. I like being that guy.
You have a good idea of when to be evil and when not to be.
Exactly.
Coincidentally, I like to play the token chaotic neutral teammate.
No. But yeah, token evil teammate is what I like to do. It's just the way I like to play. It's the party dynamic I like to play. And it's, it's fun. So this character was, you'll never guess.
Was he a priest of some sort?
He was a bad touch wizard.
Oh no. Is this the story of the lizard wizard?
No. No, the lizard wizard was actually in Divinity 2. We'll talk about Divinity 2 when we do an episode about D&D style video games. But
there's so many. I love it.
I know, and they're so good. A lot of them are so good. Anyway,
if Baldur's Gate is not a part of that, I will cry.
So this character was a bad touch wizard, and for those who aren't familiar with that, that's a build that I like to do where you combine rogue levels, wizard levels, and improved feint to cast Shocking Grasp against AC 10 with sneak attack damage. It's a melee wizard build, and it's hella fun.
That's just evil.
Yes, lawful evil, actually.
Bad touch wizards can be hilarious. However, I'm getting to the point where I prefer playing blast sorcerers.
Yeah, I mean, blast mage is good. It's just once you played one blast mage, you've played them all.
The only problem I see going from this before we continue your story is I have to imagine that mage armor is cast a lot, and you have some significant items to make this work. Otherwise, you're just going to, catch a two-handed greatsword across the face and go squish.
Well, having 18 dex helps. So so I had set out to build the token evil teammate because these people didn't really know how to play D&D all that well. They were just kind of new at it. So I figured they were going to probably do the standard party, right? They were going to probably play some good guys who do some adventuring for some reasons. The reasons ended up being that we were all somehow ensorcelled. I don't quite remember the details of that, but so I figured what was going to happen was they were going to be a bunch of do-gooders, and I'd be able to be the token evil teammate and do the stuff that was, not clean but needed done, because that's why I play that character.
Essentially doing the things that the paladin does not need to know about and the other characters are too squeamish to attempt.
Exactly that. The stuff the paladin doesn't need to know. So that's what I thought was going to happen. What actually happened was that my lawful evil character was the sane one in the group.
Oh, God, yes.
See, what actually happened was that everyone else was quote-unquote chaotic neutral, but actually chaotic evil.
So they had what they wanted to do, but they did not do it at all.
Including the party sorcerer, who I'm fairly sure was supposed to be chaotic good, but did some stuff that made my character a little queasy. So I set out to make the token evil teammate and ended up making the only sane man. So what that campaign turned into was actually an evil campaign where we were all trying to escape the sorcery that was forcing us to work together, and at least one of us was trying to maximize the casualties along the way while I was trying to make sure everyone lived. I mean, everyone in the party. Not necessarily anyone else, just everyone in the party.
Was there a paladin?
There was not. There was not a paladin in this game.
That would have made this so much fucking better, because there's nothing tastier than the salty tears of a fallen paladin.
It's like being a fighter without bonus feats. So my character was the one doing things like talking to the orcs, the random orc clan that's taken up residence in this dungeon where the artifact of great power that we need is hidden. I was the only one who was like, "Hello, fellow evil beings, let's have a talk and we will discuss what I have to give you for you to let me into here. And please ignore the fact that that sorcerer back there is currently executing your children."
Oh my god.
It was a nightmarish campaign for the 4 or 5 sessions that it lasted. It was really fun. And the reason it was fun was because I did not get to play the character I wanted to play. I had to play the only sane man. Because building a good character isn't necessarily about making a good character. I know that sounds strange.
Can I elaborate from that point?
Yeah, go ahead.
What Brandon's trying to say there is you can make a character for any kind of session you want to do, whether it's free form role play, D&D, a tabletop gaming, or just a character in a story that you're writing. And that character, you can make that character and have the predefined what you want to accomplish with that character. In your case, you wanted to be the token evil teammate for a group of new characters, for a group of new players who might not necessarily, be familiar with all the options available to them as, players in a tabletop campaign.
Exactly.
But from what that goes on, once you start telling the story with your character, Whether, like I said, whether you're writing the story and you come to a point where you realize that something needs to change with that character, or in a freeform role play, events start happening that cause your character to change and adapt. Or in tabletop, you, like you said, you were going to play the token evil teammate and end up playing the lawful evil teammate in a group of just chaotic evil monsters. Your character adapts, and once you start adapting your character to the circumstances they're in, you have two ways of going with it. You can either follow the status quo, where the character may have started out as a good character. Once you start following the status quo, that character doesn't so much become a bad character, but just becomes a character.
A neutral character, let's say.
There's no real defining or redeeming qualities about him. It's just a character that's there. They don't stand out. Whereas if you go against the status quo, then you have a character that stands out against the way the rest of the world is going.
Right. It's about rolling with the punches, really, at that point. When stuff doesn't go the way you thought it was going to, and the character as you envisioned it isn't going to work out, you think about what made that character who they were. Well, what makes the token evil teammate, the way I play the token evil teammate, which is as a foil/assistant to an overall good party, what separates or what makes that character important is pragmatism.
Which is why, usually in forms of most tabletop games, it's in the form of a rogue. They're the foil to the lawful, the lawful good paladin, or, the other, higher, holier than thou characters. The rogue is the one who's going to get things done.
Right. But that's the way I run the token evil teammate, as the pragmatic, as the one who is totally willing to just kind of casually dispose of that villain we just defeated while the paladin's not looking. So...
Right. Everybody else is going on ahead, and then you just, kind of look at them and, you slice their throat and leave them sitting against the tree they're at.
Pretty much, yeah. And that's, some parties need a character willing to do that, and that's what I like to play. But in this case, what happened was that same pragmatism resulted in me playing what was very nearly a good guy, because the rest of the party was so insane that if someone didn't stop them, it would get us all killed.
At which point you're not still becoming a good character. You've just become a evil character with a sense of self-preservation.
Exactly, right. Like, the character was still very clearly evil. Like, I really, hammered down on this character not at all being a good guy. But the pure pragmatism of the situation made what I intended to be the token evil teammate the least evil character in that party.
Which is always a fun thing to, explore on.
Right, you gotta roll with the punches, is what I'm saying. It's easy to adapt a character when you're in a situation that you weren't expecting. It didn't require me to make any change to that pragmatic character I had created for him to change roles from the token evil teammate to the only sane man. It's the same character, nothing changed about him.
It's just directing his focus instead to just accomplishing things that the rest of the party won't do, to keeping the rest of the party dying. Because if the rest of the party dies, he's likely next.
Exactly. And nothing about the character changed to do that. So that's what made that character so memorable to me, because in managing to... What made the character so memorable was accomplishing a role that the character was never designed for without compromising the character.
Which is really where you start falling in by the wayside when you're trying to make a character. When you start compromising for the character, that's when you start on the slippery slope.
Right, and we talked about this. We talked about this 2 weeks ago. Half the bad characters we talked about, the problem was they became compromised.
Exactly.
And I don't mean like you had to compromise with their DM or whatever to make the character. I'm saying that the character lost track of what it was supposed to be. And some of that's character development. Character development does happen. But what makes good character development different from bad character development is the believability of it.
Right, and going on the topic of character development, I think I've got a character I want to talk about now. That's kind of a similar thing. I'm sure both of you and most people in the chat who were part of Crossroads remember Parker.
Vaguely.
Parker was the generic mercenary character I made towards the end, who was the sheriff and all that. Ended up in a relationship with Moon and having a kid and all that.
Yeah. I remember all that.
So Parker comes in, and on the surface, it might not look like a character that's going to be memorable. Just a bog standard mercenary style character comes into the setting guarding a caravan, and just kind of goes from there. Some of the defining moments, though, are the fact that he's a bog standard character, and he ends up having a really intriguing, fun story as you go into it. Like, one of the first actions he takes once he goes on the island, or I forget it. Oh, it was Big Ben. The character Big Ben was there harassing the caravan, and Parker just, a rifle, just, laid the rifle butt across the kid's face and knocked him down. And at that point, the character could have gone one or two ways, could have just descended into the, insanity that was Blade Arm. But, he eventually, ends up becoming the sheriff of the town, ends up, forming a relationship with another character, and after various time skips has a kid. And then we get to the setting where, he's trying to make a difference, and the local crime syndicate abducts his daughter.
Right.
So this bog standard character becomes, if not central, one of the central characters in one of the major arcs of the setting, where he has to then work with the other people to rescue his daughter from this. I believe they were stand-ins for either the Triads or the Yakuza.
I believe they were Triads.
So, having to survive this onslaught. And, like with Owen, this was a fairly bog standard generic character, just something to play that was, a character to play. Because at the time, the fact that Blade Arm was locked up and wasn't really usable, I had to make another character. I made this guy, and he ended up, forming attachments and accomplishing this amazingly fun and sweet and in-depth story arc. And I think him and Moon and the daughter, I think they were one of the few people who came out of that entire role play with a happy ending, for the most part.
Yeah, for the most part. Yeah, that was a pretty good character. I remember him. I remember him being, like, on the surface, he seemed very passive, right? Like, it seemed like a lot of stuff just happened to him. He didn't really do a lot of stuff.
Or he was in the wrong place at the wrong time and had to intervene. But yeah, like he didn't go out of his way to make enemies with these people, but it was because he was the acting sheriff and something had to be done about the crime in the city or the town, that things had to be done. And so he was, his child was kidnapped. Phoebe, was it your character that we raided their apartment of and took their shit?
Yeah, that was Chassis.
That thing came up where he ended up having to intervene there and, play the role of a sheriff. So, like, at no point was that character designed, set up to be the sheriff, but he ended up filling that role and going from there. So that was what made him one of my better characters, more memorable characters. I still love Parker.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Let's switch gears a little bit. Tell us about the best character you never got to play.
You want me to go ahead, or would you like to go?
No, yeah, you go.
So, a few people will remember the failed experiment we had after Crossroads for another RP. It was, I believe it was another interdimensional thing where people were brought into this setting kind of like that one episode of Doctor Who where they end up in the recreation of The Shining, as it were.
Yes, yeah.
It was called Quigley. So for this art role play, I made a character, Adwin Pri. I can't pronounce it. I'm going to butcher it. I'm not even going to try to find it because it was a Welsh name I made. And the character probably had the most backstory I created for one, aside from 2 or 3 others I made who might be mentioned later. Made an entire world for her involving the setup of it's a fantasy world where magic is king. And this particular kingdom is, ruled by magic. It's not one of those situations like Black Clover where, everybody can use magic and the person who can't use magic is the king. It's, not the king, but a, special snowflake character, which is still wrong. But so everybody can use magic. People can use magic are fairly common. It's expected people who can use magic have a bit higher status in society, but non-magic users are fairly common, but they just don't have the same, place in society as the others. And Addie, I made her as a young girl from a small farming village who was the first person in her family in several generations to display any aptitude for magic. And so she went to the city and became a member of a guild. And which was, basically what it says on the tin. It was a guild that was dedicated to investigations and archaeology, I believe. And she started honing her craft. And then she goes off on this adventure with a group, and these bandits strike, and they end up raiding the caravan, and she ends up running for her life with another character. Just a typical beginning story that's raining, it's fucking cold and terrifying. They're running through the muck, and the guy she's with makes a last stand to allow her a chance to escape. And she's running and running and running away, doing her best to stave off the attackers. And she ends up falling through this portal and ends up in this hotel at the bottom floor where all the other people are starting to wander around. And what I liked most about this character, which I'm going to have to find all of her information again and bring her back in some way, shape, or form somewhere, was just how much she acted like a real person, kind of like how Owen was before, but this just went to a different level. She's going along and she's running from these people, and like I said, it's a world with magic, so she ends up in this strange place, and of course, thinks that she's still in danger, and a couple of people are exploring and find her, and she starts running away, trying to protect herself from these guys. And, eventually they talk her down and she joins the rest of the party, and somebody mentions what was going on, and it clicks for her. It's like she's been in complete survival mode this entire time. She saw, I believe it was the character who paid the last stand was someone she had a crush on. And, she watched some of her closest friends get butchered by these bandits, and it just all comes flooding back, and she just breaks down and starts bawling right there in front of these strange people. Hasn't really said more than 2 or 3 words to anybody, and just breaks down. So I'm sure everybody else thinks she's a crazy person, but it's what you would expect a person to do in such a situation. She's been in shock this entire time, and once it finally settles in what's happening, the floodgates let loose, and she just is fractured and breaks down. But what also made her an interesting character to play was the entire system that was developed for her magic. Thanks to our buddy Jarrett, he helped me devise the magic system for her, which she was a card mage, not like kind of like Cardcaptor Sakura, but different, where her magic was based upon a standard deck of 52 playing cards, and each individual card had a different spell that it could produce based upon which was drawn. And basics for the system was she draws a standard 5-card hand, can use the card so many times based upon wherefore. The whole element set up with fire, wind, water, and earth, and it's just this complete in-depth system for her magic that just made her a character I want to revisit and play some, but factored in with her backstory and everything that happened to her that set her character, just made her a really in-depth, loved character for me that I really hate I didn't get to play.
Sad day. Sad day. And, you know, we make characters all the time just as, like, just for fun, pretty much. Like, get bored, make a character, right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. And I know for a fact that Rail is the same way. Like he'll just, you know, if he's bored and has nothing else to do, he'll just make characters for Pathfinder or what have you, just to say like, well, I was working on this character and I might be useful for this particular, you know, game, so on and so forth. It's just sometimes a fun thing to do.
Fair enough. I'm trying to make a character right now for something. Yes, for a thing.
I have one to talk about. I actually had a few to talk about, but one of them I can't talk about with specifically because well, Steve is in the chat. Brandon, you already know, but
yeah. Let's not talk about any characters that are currently being played.
But I do have one that I never got to play.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay. So around about the same time that Steve was talking about his card mage, there were a lot of characters that didn't get played because the entire setting was scrapped. Mine was Charlotte du Parmentier, and she was what amounted to a cleric or priestess of a goddess of history. The goddess was in question was Lexica, and her whole deal was her priesthood, her priestesses were all, you know, scribes. They were basically historians. You know, the guys and gals would go out in the world and just document everything. All they would do is write shit down. Writing stuff was considered prayer. They were supposed to do that 3 times a day. And, you know, they got some small spells, nothing really huge, but, like, they had the best afterlife, like, anyone could think of. You basically, if you're a believer, you get to live in the worlds that have been written up by those who have gone before you. And if you're a priest or a priestess, you get to write new worlds. And they just go bouncing in and out of worlds, and Lexica is basically running this big experiment with her afterlife, trying to, you know, how do we create a perfect world? How do we have some place where everyone can be happy? Who can create the most wonder? Who can create the best stories? And there was a big war going on. I forget the name of the war exactly, but France was invaded, and there was the big battle of Agincourt, and she was out there with just this kind of peasant army that got drafted, you know, barely equipped, and she was writing their stuff. Her brother was there, a few of his friends were there. They killed their sergeant. They actually helped win the Battle of Agincourt, which was not what normally happened in history.
Did you know they actually lost that?
Yeah, they actually lost that. But, you know, this additional squad managed to turn things around because they had a cleric on their side. They had a number of clerics on their side. France had Lexica, and Lexica actually gave her believers power. But, like, they liberated the Cathedral of Lexica, which is basically just this huge stone cathedral where even the stone itself is marked with words that, like, you can't erase them. They're actually chiseled fucking in there, and the floor is stacked ceiling with books, and there's ladders everywhere. It's absolute complete and fucking madness. But like, she goes to the door, she gets to this location where the story actually starts, and I never got to play her, and she had such fucking promise. Like, it actually stabs me in the heart to think about it.
Oh yeah, don't worry. I'm the same way about Addie.
Well, I'm going to talk about a character I never got to play. His name was Eli. Elijah Keene.
Not to be confused with Eli Burning, the continuation of Old Man Henderson.
Nor to be confused with Eli Burning, that sensation you sometimes get when you urinate.
You should really get that checked out.
What, is it just me?
Yep.
So, Eli was a cowboy. And when I say that, I don't mean he was some guy from the South in America in the 1870s. I mean he was a cowboy.
Saddle up, buckaroos. It's gonna be a fun story.
What in tarnation? He was quite literally a stereotype of a cowboy. Specifically, he was a stereotype of the grizzled old cowboy. The, John Wayne in True Grit. Or, more like the Coen Brothers remake of True Grit. And
I ain't do nothing for you, son.
yeah, that. And he was, well, he was a stereotype, and he was designed to be a stereotype. And the reason he was designed to be a stereotype is because we had developed a system by which it was called a legend system. If a character using the legend system was like what you think of when you think about that thing, that character would gain the properties of that thing. So basically, because you look at Eli and he is a cowboy, he suddenly gains the ability to do things that people can't actually do, but we think cowboys can for some reason.
You think, therefore I am.
Exactly. Eli had the special, or Eli, and actually several characters in the setting, but Eli had the ability to tap into that. So, like, because he matches the legend of the cowboy, he could do things like be unnaturally skilled with horsemanship, or fire two revolvers without looking and hit targets, or
Fire 2 revolvers and not reload.
right. He had these very specific abilities that existed as unique, like almost magical skills, and that he never once questioned. But the reason he has them is because he is a stereotype. It's like an inversion of your standard. It's like an inversion of your standard character where the character becomes stereotypical because of the abilities they have. He had the abilities he had because he was stereotypical. And
so I have a question I've been meaning to ask about Eli concerning that ability. So that entire premise is based upon what people in general believe for that specific character. What the zeitgeist believes for that character. What happens if that character ends up in a setting where nobody's familiar with the source material? What happens if he ends up in, say, 18th century France where there's no reference for a cowboy?
No, it just works. It's based on his original timeline.
But so his power is based upon not so much what others believe, but what he believes.
No, not exactly. Again, it's based on his original timeline. His power set is called Myth of the Old West, and it works based on the future of our timeline. Like, it's kind of meta. It works based on our culture. Because he is from our past. You see what I mean?
Yeah, so anybody who's familiar with, like you said, True Grit, both variations, or the series of Riflemen, or Rio Bravo.
Right, he gains a power set based on our Western movies. Yes, that's literally what happened.
So for the quick and the dead, he would just be able to draw rapidly.
Yeah, and he's got an unnatural quick draw, although his quick draw was never the point. Like he wasn't really a quick draw gunfighter, but he could do it.
Right, because that's the myth you perceive about gunfighters,
Right,
which
exactly.
brings up another thing that we need to bring up at some, not for another episode, just the correlations, which I'm sure it's been done, but it'd be fun for us to do, the correlations between like the mythos of the cowboy and the mythos of, say, the samurai and warrior cultures and things such as that.
Okay, do not get me started on how every spaghetti western was stolen frame for frame from Kurosawa movies. I will talk about that all night.
Which is why we will have an episode about it. Probably multiple episodes.
All right. So Eli was a special kind of monster, I guess. So this character's not going to get played, so I can talk about some backstory stuff that I was not going to share. So Eli, like any good cowboy, was out for revenge.
Dun dun dun.
He got shot and left for dead by one of his party members. They were, I don't want to say bandits, but they were totally bandits. And what?
Right. So the beginning of Red Dead Redemption.
Essentially, yeah. So he got shot and left for dead, and though he did not die, he did get a pretty bad limp out of the deal, as well as some pretty bad neuropathy on his right side. But
as someone who suffers from neuropathy, that is terrible.
Yeah, it's not good. So he went on a journey to achieve revenge, and along the way, he just so happened to pick up the guy who he was trying to kill's daughter. And basically filled her head with some nonsense and taught her to shoot with the intent that she would kill him. Because
that's some good Schadenfreude there.
That's some good Schadenfreude there, right? And so right before the roleplay starts, like right before he ends up in the Magic Hotel, he got cold feet about it. He was like, well, maybe I shouldn't actually do the thing I was planning to do. Maybe I should just walk up in there and shoot this guy myself, because that's probably a nicer thing to do. So that's what he was trying to do. So he storms into the building after this guy who he's bent his life to killing for the last few years, and finds himself in the wrong hotel.
Bum bum bum, which
Bum,
is where
bum,
all our
bum.
characters come together.
Right, and that's pretty much where it left off, because that character never really got played. Which is terribly unfortunate, because I really feel like the mythologue thing could have gone a long way.
What it sounds like we need to do is we just need to take these three characters and then invade some random freeform RP.
Well, I mean, Phoebe and I still need to, randomly arena fight our characters who are just swords.
Oh, yes. That's the thing.
Yeah, we will do that, and then we'll do a dramatic reading of it.
Yeah, we need to absolutely do that.
Yeah. So what have we learned?
For that particular segment?
Yeah, what did we learn from that segment about the best characters we never got to play?
That's a tough one. I think by and large we need to understand that just because you make a really good character that you love and other people enjoy the concept of doesn't necessarily mean that if they don't get played, it means it's a bad character. I kind of have another character that fits in that same bill from D&D campaign. It was actually a character that I made for one of Rail's games.
Okay,
which was
while I think about a lesson.
Of course. So this character, who's I can't remember what his name was at the time. I'd have to look at my character sheets, which I'm too lazy to do. So the character was a rogue, which, shocker, everybody who knows me knows that I prefer playing dex-based or roguish characters. It's just a thing. But this character had a backstory I created for him to associate with how he had certain abilities, which essentially went along the lines of he was a typical rogue in a city, part of a thieves guild, as he was coming up because he was an orphan. And he ended up in a situation where his guild was wiped out by some undead. And then he went after the necromancer in charge of said undead and seeking revenge, kind of like Eli. Except while he was on the way, he ended up being left for dead and it was taken in by a church. I believe the god in question was Ilmater. Ilmater being, at the time, the god responsible for suffering and helping others and being antithesis to various undead. So my character was a rogue taken in by this church, and he started training with their paladin order and the clerics, and he developed the ability to be able to target undead and utilize his rogue skills to fight undead more effectively. So, he gained the feats and everything that allowed him to, use sneak attack damage on undead. And so he ended up joining this paladin order as like a rogue and ended up on his quest to continue, seeking out the necromancer who, caused the death of his guild, his first family, to protect his second family. And that was a character I really wanted to play, but I never got the opportunity to because the game fell apart due to scheduling conflicts. But it's something I want to go back to, and I probably will remake at another point.
I have it.
All right.
The moral of the story is you can't get caught up on characters you didn't get to play.
Sounds reasonable.
Because, we don't even really know if these were good characters. We have no idea. These are characters we made. These are characters that looked good on the outside, but they never made contact with the enemy, so who knows?
And as I mentioned, no plan survives contact with the enemy.
Exactly. So you can talk about characters you made that you really wish you could have played, but it's actually different from a good character. Right? Because a good character is defined by playing. Right?
At least in a tabletop sense, yeah.
Yeah. Excellent. I'm glad that we,
I would also... It isn't that a character that you didn't get to play you shouldn't get hung up on. I think they should be remembered, and they should be brought out when you reach that point where they would be perfect.
Yeah, but are you ever actually going to reach that point?
You never know.
You never know. Wait. Yeah, I think that's true. I think that I think it really just depends, I guess. Yeah. And you gotta just keep making characters, obviously, because the real secret to making a good character is to just make 50 characters. And make every one of them with absolute love and care, much as you can possibly provide, but make 50 of them, and one of them would be good. Maybe even more than one of them. Maybe I've had too many beers.
Not at all.
Excellent. So, yeah, I think that was I think that's a good way to put that. Good lesson. So what can
Good
we talk
lessons.
about next?
Ooh, we could talk about settings. Here's me saying it like I'm a regular.
Well, our guest says settings. You want to talk about settings? And how do you mean? Like, how do we talk about settings in the context of making a good character? Do we talk about how? Do we talk
I mean,
about
I do have a couple more characters I could talk about.
Well,
Let's talk
about another. Let's
what
talk
about-
about another character, and then we'll talk about setting.
Okay. I
So-
mean, this is. Why not talk about builds?
Builds also works.
Yeah, we'll talk about builds. Actually, I can spend a long time talking about builds. So yeah. So tell us about your character, though, Steve.
Well, it's a character that, as Rael pointed out, Yargo, my 25 characters that are just sitting around. Yes, that is exactly right. One of my favorite characters I made in recent years was one that you're both very familiar with, and that's Pax. Whether or not Pax is a good character can be up for, debate after the topic, but I think by and large he's better than some of the other characters I've made. Right?
Sure.
So Pax is what I might, affectionately refer to as Blade Arm 2.0. Kind of a similar setup as a fighter type character and everything else, but he had just additional layers to him that made him a more interesting character for me looking back on it now. And for those who aren't familiar with Pax, Pax was a character we made in our one of our more recent endeavors, referred to as the Ring Ward, where the setting, which we'll probably dive into in our continued discussions later on this show, was a world where there were two distinct, different sentient beings. You had humanity split up into their three kingdoms, and then you had this second race referred to as the Fallen, who primarily ended up being servants to humanity based upon the properties of their existence, which was they were essentially cloven from the living stone. Every gemstone, every mineral of value, your cat's eyes, your emeralds, your moonstone, your diamonds, everything of that nature came from a Fallen's containment capsule, as it were, as they were cleaving from the earth. So gems were fairly rare, and each gem had a way of binding a Fallen to the holder's will. Pax was one of the Fallen, and he was one of, not so much the original, but one of the ones that was active since the beginning of the actual role play. Pax was a very proper individual. He essentially, every time he had a master, he served as their steward or valet or butler or what have you. So he would be very proper and very very knowledgeable on the actions of court, and able to serve that function as being just a servant for his master. But he also had an additional training, which was one of his first master had insisted that he be taught in various forms of combat so he could be a protector and other more clandestine factors, which made him more of an agent than a servant. So you'd go to a court and Pax would go about collecting information and doing all sorts of roguey things. And I like Pax just because he never went out of his way to really become a main character, a primary character. He factored into a lot of different plots, but he was never like the driving force behind everything. He served a couple different masters and ended up being an advisory in different situations, but he was primarily, meant to stay behind the lines because his primary ability, as all Fallens had, were based upon an aspect which tied in with their names. In Pax's case, Pax being the Latin for one of the Latin variations for quiet or silence, he was the fallen of silence. So his entire thing was he didn't make a sound and he could silence entire areas, which doesn't really sound like much. It's not like he can throw fireballs, but he can sneak anywhere he wants to, and he can, have a full-blown combat encounter with somebody and not make a sound. But then you have the aspects which never really came up, but it would have been intriguing to just what happens when you lock somebody in a room with a blindfold and remove all sounds from said room for 24 or 24, 36, or 48 hours, as it were, just to see what that was as a form of torture, because that was another thing he was factored in. Plus, as is kind of a cliche with most characters, some form of misfortune had to befall him. In his case, his second master, who was not as good as his first, who died on a mission, the second master did not like him and so operated on him to make him better. Believed that the fallen of silence should not be able to speak at all, and so tried to remove his vocal cords without killing him, which left Pax in having this harsh, raspy whisper of a voice. I believe one of the best ways to describe it was, imagine comparing his voice to taking shards of glass and grinding them into gravel. Just that kind of raspy and scraping sound. He's still able to speak and speak fairly clearly, but it's just a disturbing sound to hear. And, there were other situations, there was some backstory and some arcs that were going to be brought in for the character that never really got explored, but, more as a sadder. But, Pax was a much more interesting character and a better character than Blade Arm by a landslide.
Despite the fact they were very similar.
They were extremely similar, but Pax had a different, what's the word I'm looking for? Not leitmotif. Different feel about him, I guess you could say. Where Blade Arm was, cocky and over the top. Always, I'm going to be the very best like no one ever was. Pax was a little bit more subdued at times. I mean, there were situations where he, went above and beyond and showed that he was, a threat, but he didn't seek these situations out. Like, he didn't stand in the center of the room and just say, accepting all challengers, as it were.
Yeah.
But Pax was another situation where Blade Arm eventually, pushed every character that might have had any kind of connection to him to the side and didn't accept him. Pax, reveled in having these character connections with Brasha and with Nox and with Amito and the other Fallen, the other characters in the guild. He, relished having these connections to people. So I think looking at that, you could say a good character is a character that not only has their own strengths and is an interesting character by and large, but also is willing to accept what other characters do and work off of that, rolling with the punches, as it were.
You know what? Yes, and that's actually... I can't believe we hadn't touched on that. That's actually super important. It's useless to just make a good character.
They have to be played well.
It's not even that. It's useless to make a good character. It's useless to just play a good character. If you've got the best character in the world in a group that doesn't know how to play, or in a group that specifically is bad at playing, or you've got the best character in the world in a setting that just doesn't support it, or if you've got the best character you've ever made in a situation where there isn't any roleplay, then you haven't really done anything at all. And part of what makes a character good is just how they work with the rest of the party. Because think about it, right? If you have... Think about it in terms of freeform, okay?
Yeah.
It's just like how it's weird being the one person who types in 3 paras when everyone else is one-lining.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's the same kind of thing. Like, no matter how good your character is,
Or how good your writing is.
or how good your writing is, no matter. But let's stick with the characters. If your character is, if your character's far and away better than everyone else in the party, that's not compelling either. Like, you end up in a situation where, well, resentment can happen for one, because you're the only one actually. You start to feel like you're the only one actually trying. Am I right?
Yeah, and if you're the only one actually trying, regardless of whether or not you are, if your character is some sort of, godsend character, and then you don't let the other people's characters do anything to progress the story. And if you're not progressing the story, it's just stagnant and nothing can progress.
Right, because at the end of the day, roleplay is a teamwork. It's teamwork. It's all about teamwork.
It requires at least 2 people to roleplay, otherwise you're writing.
Exactly. Yes, that's literally... Yes. So if all you care about is making the best character you could possibly make, just write. Because whatever you make has to work with what everyone else has. It's just the way it has to be. And you can do...
Right.
I mean, you can do all kinds of crazy stuff with that. You can do the 5 wizard party, which I've done before, and it's hilarious and wonderful.
Well, yes, if you have essentially the equivalent of 5 gods running around, everything occurs.
True. You can do the 5 wizard party. You can do the you can do the brooding character, the dark and brooding edgelord in the corner of the pub. But that only works.
Go on, continue your say. I got a thought after that.
Okay. That only works when your party tolerates it, and it only works when it adds something. Like, if you were to make a character, say I made a character who was just a joker. Like, I made a character
Or smoker at Midnight Toker?
Yeah. Like, say I made a character, and I promise I have not done this, but I am literally talking about a thing that happened in a campaign of mine by a person who will not be named. What if I made a character who spent his entire starting gold on pipeweed, and then took that as an excuse to, in character and out, just toke up at random moments, just lull in the conversation, lull in the fighting. We just finished slaughtering some goblins. Light the pipe.
I see that as an opportunity to potentially avoid some conflicts.
You're not wrong, and the peace pipe was used, but that doesn't sound compelling, right? That sounds like a stoner comedy. But I happened to be DMing for a group of people who, let's say, were fans of the Ganj, let's say.
Harold and Kumar go to the Tomb of Elemental Evil.
That is pretty much literally what happened, yes. Like, so the end result of the campaign was that we had these characters, all of whom were on the surface amateurish characters, like, because these weren't people who played D&D. These weren't people who really cared about D&D. They were there to hang out, have a good time, eat some snacks, and smoke some ganj. So that's what they did. And while they were doing that, I ran a D&D game, because why the hell not? And the result of that was that these people had these kind of ridiculous characters who loved pipeweed and enjoyed adventuring just for, like, the sake of getting really, really high and checking out the Tomb of Elemental Evil. And for some reason, it worked. It worked so well because everyone was on the same page. Everybody was Harold and Kumar. Except me, obviously, because I was the frustrated dungeon master who doesn't smoke trying to make things work out. But
I mean, you could also look at it as the most terrifying episode of Scooby-Doo ever.
Also true. But the result of that, that's what I'm saying, the result of that, because all the players were on the same page, because all the characters were close to the same, let's say, quality, they weren't bad, they were just kind of middling, kind of average, kind of what you'd expect from a new player. And because in character and out, they were just here to have a good time, the game ended up being fun. Like, really fun. For them and for me. Like, I legitimately enjoyed DMing for this group of people who barely gave a shit what I was saying. Because we were all just there to have a good time. It was great. Like, that game went on for months. Weekly.
I don't blame it.
We would sit down, they would light up, and we'd do an adventure. I barely even prepared. I barely prepared anything. We just did an adventure. It was like, today you guys are gonna find out what was it? You are going to find out who's been stealing Old Man Henderson's cows. You know what the result of that was?
What was it?
It was a necromancer making skeleton cows.
Moose from the beyond the grave.
Yes.
That sounds fucking amazing.
It was awesome. It was really great.
And on the topic of fun fucking stories, you know, we mentioned a couple of times now Old Man Henderson, which if anybody, which I highly doubt anybody in our particular chat has not read it, you need to look up Old Man Henderson because it is by far one of the best transcriptions of what happens in some games ever.
There was a campaign that my dad was talking about because he started playing Dark Heresy. And he works on a golf course. He gets a lot of the ideas.
As much as I want to hear about Dark Heresy, the point I was going to make about Brandon when he mentioned the edgelord in the corner of the bar. Also, another reading recommendation or listening recommendation, because there's a few of them floating around YouTube. The Ballad of Edgardo.
For some reason, I was sure you were going to say the Ballad of Chasey Lane. I'm not sure why.
No, I'm not going to do the Ballad of Chasey Lane, except at karaoke. But for the Ballad of Edgardo, if you're not familiar, it is essentially the summing up of a freeform role play, but with a combat system and setup, where the guy playing the character walks into a tavern for this RP, which is said to be designed around original anime-based characters. And he's playing the typical boisterous bruiser type of Fist of the North Star type character, and everybody else is playing everybody's Naruto OC and sitting in the corner of the tavern, which had to be some sort of weird, fucked up, horrific, eldritch abomination geometry pattern, because there were 18 of them and they are all sitting in the shadowy corner of the tavern.
I think I've seen that happen in like actual text RP.
Right, so that's just a reading recommendation. But Phoebe, you have me intrigued. You mentioned your dad played Dark Heresy. Do enlighten us.
So he ran a brief Dark Heresy campaign, and one of the missions that the Inquisitors went on basically took place on a golf course on, I think it's I forget what you call them, basically the Garden Worlds.
Agri-World?
Yeah, Agri-World. And, everything is automated. There are robots that clip the grass, that put the holes in, move things around, maintain the grounds.
Let's
And
be fair. They're servitors, so they're lobotomized fucking prisoners doing this in the form of humanoid robot abominations. But yes,
yeah, but they're like really specialized servitors, is what he had in mind. Like he was thinking actually based on the machinery he sees come into his shop to be used. And I imagine he would have dark heresied it. But basically, a chaos infestation arises, and suddenly you have chaos servitors on a golf course using like the motors. I don't know if you've seen them, but they have those big spinning reels of blades.
as somebody who's played golf for a long period of time and was on the golf team in high school and grew up around that, yes, I know what you're referring to, and that sounds almost as terrifying as a Chaos Reaver Titan.
But he had this idea that everybody was using golf clubs. The Inquisitors would end up having to use golf clubs against this machinery.
Power golf clubs.
Does golf exist in the grim darkness of the far future?
Apparently, it's one of the things that survived in his campaign.
It better fucking. That sounds amazing. Brandon, you do know that we're going to have to at some point just dive into the 40K in this
Oh, it's
podcast
going to happen.
itself.
It's going to happen. We're just trying to
Bring everyone in gently.
No, I was just trying to delay the inevitable for as long as possible.
Which that strangely brings me to another character that I never got to play. It just kind of fell apart, but he was such a fun character. In the Dark Heresy game, I actually got to make a character for him play in. Our buddy Gerard ran it, who is currently our storyteller for the Vampire the Masquerade game that several of us are in. He ran a Dark Heresy campaign, and I made a tech priest. Granted, it was a tech priest that was eventually going to steal a Dark Eldar Splinter cannon and become something akin to a Skitarii, but that's neither here nor there.
I mean, it's one of those places.
Indeed. But what sums up this particular group, despite there were 2 or 3 who said they were familiar with the 40K universe, is with our first meeting with our senior Inquisitor. Everybody's sitting around their table, and you got the gun turrets on the ceiling because Inquisition. And he comes in and greets everybody with this, symbol of the Aquila, and nobody responds except for my tech priest, who makes this the symbol of the cog.
Sure.
Which kind of said it for me. He's like, oh, this is gonna be fun. So we start our investigation. We claim our quarters at the top of this fucking Spire hotel, and we get up there, and we're trying to figure out how to disable the elevator so it can't come up to our floor, and so on and so forth. And my tech priest goes into the elevator to inspect the mechanism. Crits his fucking roll. Just figures out the best way to disable the elevator for this particular section. And what does he do?
I don't remember. What does he do?
Well, the answer to the question is the solution to this problem is to flip a switch on the underside of the console. While they don't let me go through the entire 45-minute spiel, he goes through a 45-minute spiel of appeasing the machine spirits, applying the holy unguents, and applying the ritual of the knock on the device before flipping the switch when everybody stops paying attention.
That sounds about right.
Oh, I miss that character so much. It was such a fun character when I got to play him. And for anybody who's played the Dawn of War franchise, you're familiar with the tech priest voice from Dawn of War.
Oh, did you do the voice?
I feel the machine spirit's pain.
Ah, good times.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, Dawn of War. Okay, so yeah, we're gonna do a 40K roundup at some point. It's gonna be amazing, but not right now. Dear God, not right now. Dear God, Emperor, not right now. So, and that actually, you know, that's another good example of making a character to fit the setting. Because I talked about how important it was for a character to fit the party, right? And for the party to have some kind of, like, dynamic to it, for the party to actually, you know, work as a party.
Right.
But you also have to kind of do the same thing with the setting. Now, in, like, D&D, you can really just make standard adventure characters and it'll be fine. Like, you don't have to worry too much about where exactly your character's from and what they did for the first 10 years of their life, because you can assume that they're from Peasantville and they did peasant things.
Peasant.
Right, they peasanted all over the place until eventually they peasanted too hard and then had to stop peasanting forever.
Bandits invaded the village, burned it to the ground, or orcs invaded the village and burned it to the ground.
Or the village invaded itself and burned itself to the ground, or...
Giant ratmen invaded the village and burned it to the ground.
Right, goblins can invade the village and burn it to the ground. But, like, you can do that in D&D. Like, you can just make a character with that generic backstory, because it's not that important. What's important is the personality. What's important is how the character reacts to situations and how the character interacts with the party. It doesn't matter the backstory so much.
I would say that it matters depending on the DM.
Well, some DMs might insist upon having a backstory, and that's fine, because, you know, your backstory can give him story hooks. Absolutely.
Oh, absolutely, which is why I love going back to our first episode, not Dark Heresy, fuck, that's another episode. That's a future episode. I'm a time traveler, fear me.
Did you fail your save?
What I was getting at, the World of Darkness in Vampire the Masquerade, you have in order to get more points to spend, you have the various, essentially D&D players would be more familiar with feats and flaws, where if you can spend, you know, you have options to take so many things, but you get fewer access to more experience points to use, or you can take detriments. And while that's great as a way to metagame a little bit, it does give your storyteller some awesome plot points to use.
Yeah, for sure. I'm not saying that you should really just ignore your backstory. I'm just saying that backstory is not as important as people give it credit for. Like, you don't need a 10-page backstory. You really don't.
While it can help, it really doesn't, because essentially the only thing that, by and large, the only thing that people will care about in any kind of setting is their interactions they have with your character.
Right. The only time I would ever insist on having, like, a big, long backstory would be if we were doing, like, an epic level campaign, because I kind of need to know how you got to epic level.
Right. But, like, in, like, the original description, just kind of, not really off topic. My original description for Blade Arm was just a single line of text after some, you know, basic physical stats. And from there, it's just like, well, I can either interact with these characters, and if they ask about backstory, I can be, you know, vague about it and build the backstory from there. So, in theory, you don't have to have a backstory at all when you're creating a character. You can bullshit your way through it and then write down your bullshittery and make a story from that.
It's actually surprisingly rare that I have a backstory on a character when I'm playing tabletop.
Right. It's like, it's to the point. Well, not to the point, but it's almost easier in that regard, because at that point you're not slaving away writing for hours and hours, making this backstory and making this perfect little snowflake, this perfect, amazing, and beautiful thing that you've occasionally thrown through a wood chipper because, hey, what person playing a character hasn't thrown them through a wood chipper to give them backstory? And then, you know, suddenly it's like, oh, well, we're actually not going to be able to play this game because so-and-so's work schedule changed, or not really getting much, you know, input on this, so we're disavowing it, or like, oh yeah, like, we're going a completely different way because such and such said this. So it's almost easier in that regard to just get a vague backstory, make a character, and then, you know, bullshit your way through the rest of the backstory as you play the character.
That's generally how I go about it. I usually just, So where's your character from? I don't know. Where people are from? I usually tend toward a more aristocratic play style. Like, my characters are well spoken and they, like to negotiate. So I tend to play like, or I tend to say like, well, my character's from a noble family, but they kind of ran out of money, but something like that. Just a generic backstory to explain what this strangely well-spoken adventurer is doing out here adventuring.
I'm slightly the opposite in terms of that. I usually play somebody who's from the fucking gutters. Both equally valid, but it just basically boils down to, do you want to expand off of that and make your backstory, or do you just want to say like, oh, I'm from this small fishing town, and just go the hipster route? Like, you've probably never heard of it.
Oh my god. Yes. We will play hipster D&D. It will be amazing.
I'm all for this.
Oh, I learned wizardry from this little-known magician. You've probably never heard of him.
I mean, I can swing a sword pretty good. I mean, I used to do the thing with the dummy, and it's kind of cool.
My Distorted Truth says, my sorcerer vapes. Exactly, yes.
Oh my god.
My bard starts strumming out the chords to fucking Hot Water's Music Vagabond to inspire the party to not be down in the fucking dumps, man.
Hold on 1 second. I'm going to say one phrase. Vape-based spellcasting.
No. No.
Yes.
No, this is where I draw the line. No.
Fuck you. I'm going to make a character whose entire thing is just, well, fuck it. No, we can't even do that because it's been taken by One Piece.
Okay,
Flavors,
wait, guys.
Specific flavors as physical components.
Yes.
While we were talking about this, I had an actual idea for a campaign. Welcome to Brandon's Dungeon Master Corner. Listen to this. A campaign in which the party plays a band of bards.
But I hate the fireball flavor.
A game in which the party plays a band of bards and maybe their manager.
I can't say that I've never heard of that before because I think there's a well-received story about a band of bards who are just Deathclock, the D&D campaign.
Okay, see, because that was literally my idea. Just straight up that. Yeah, an all-gnome hair metal band. There you go.
I'm all for this, actually.
And
although I do worry that if you bring certain part of our group into it, that it will just be, Pentakill from League of Legends as D&D characters.
You know what? That would also be fine. Yeah, no, that sounds fine. Let's just do that.
I'm sold.
But yeah, I bet we could get some pretty decent characters if we just had everyone make a death metal bard.
Death metal!
I bet that if I did this campaign, I would get 5 different death metal bards that would all be decent characters.
Sold. When do you want me to start making a character? I can start making one tomorrow.
I do not have the time in my life to run this campaign right now, but it's going to go in the woodwork, and we'll come back to it later.
Fair enough.
We're going to have to come back to it later. We might do something like... Actually, how would you feel, Steven, about doing a special episode of Save vs. Bourbon where we just drink and I run a one-shot?
I'm fine. Yes.
Okay,
always.
cool. So we'll put that in the pipe. We'll make that something we can do later on.
We'll either have to start earlier, or make sure that everybody understands. Look, we're going to probably be going for a little while. Have fun.
Yeah, we'll need more people too, but I'm gonna leave that open as an option. And if anybody wants to be a part of that when I eventually do it, please do let me know. As for the actual topic of discussion today.
Right.
Today we've talked about making a character good by making it unique, making a character good by committing to what makes that character different from other characters. We've talked about how a character has to fit into both the setting and the party, and how the party dynamic makes a character that could otherwise not be great into a great character. We've talked about good backstories. We've talked about less good backstories. We've talked about all kinds of things that go into making a decent character. We could talk about builds, like we could get in depth with it and talk about, what kind of builds make a D&D game, but really if we were going to do that, I would do an episode on party dynamics.
I'm cool with that.
Not next episode, but we will do an episode on party dynamics. Actually, it might be next episode. So we've talked about kind of all these things that go into making a great character and how they all kind of work together to make a great character. And I want to know, guys, have we missed anything? Is there anything that we haven't talked about that is just super necessary to making a character that really hits you?
Did we really go over fitting the character to the specific setting?
Thank you very much for the donation, Distorted Truth. No, we really didn't. We can, if you want to, talk about the setting. We kind of got into that a little bit with Pax because his backstory was so intertwined with the setting for Ringward. You can't really talk about any Crossroads characters with that because Crossroads' setting was, well, it wasn't one, like, really.
Other than no characters, every character had to be original and no, characters from established properties.
Right. So, if you want to, if you've got a really good example of a setting character, we can talk about that. That sounds good.
I might be able to dive into that a little bit, maybe. Phoebe, do you have anything to add to this?
I do not. It seems like we're wrapping up.
Okay, no, we're not wrapping up yet. Let's talk about settings. So,
I think by and large, majority of the characters I've mentioned so far have benefited from applying a character to their specific setting. With Parker and Owen, fitting in with Crossroads, the setting for that, no magic. No, Owen was completely magicless. Parker was magicless, but he had tech, and tech didn't work on Crossroads. But, factoring in, like, how would a character react to this certain establishment? We might have to start pulling from other characters we've seen in such settings and things like that nature. And as I was mentioning earlier, I was going to call out Rail for his love of the show Lucifer. So, Rail and Phoebe and Pat and several other friends of ours, Ja and a couple other people, and Jared, are part of a Vampire the Masquerade campaign currently. Set in New York around the turn of the new millennium. And by and large, I think Rail's character fits the setting fairly well, and is basically a bit of a spoof off Lucifer because of how his whole character is set up around the nightclub of Lux and just being part of the coterie that runs this specific area in New York. But then you have my character, who is Axel, who is the antithesis a bit of what Lux is. So in this campaign, primarily the big dogs, quote unquote, are my character Axel and Rael's character, Gabriel, who is Gabriel's the proprietor of a club called Lux, and Axel is proprietor of a punk rock bar venue called the Ouroboros, or the Snake Pit. And so just fitting in with the setting of this is New York around 2000, you've got your various clubs and everything. The whole club scene is kind of established, with all the characters are established around. You have, by and large, most of the characters central around Lux, and then you have my guy as the outlier. They'll get along fairly well. But just fitting this character, this prim and slightly proper aristocratic vampire character, running a piano bar type of establishment in a neighborhood in New York City around the turn of the century, as it were, and just orchestrating everything for that particular neighborhood, protecting it and everything. And I love Gabriel as a character. He's so amusing, and the play that we have from the other characters is fun as well. And you factor in Axel and his setup with, well, it's 2000, it's New York, you've got your various venues and everything around for music, so it's a punk venue, as it were. So kind of CBGB's-esque type thing. So just have those characters like, well, this is the setting we have to work with. Let's build the character around this. It's like, well, I want to make a nightclub owner. Well, I also want to make a nightclub owner. And just going from that and expanding off of that premise has really, really been fun so far.
Wait, did you make 2 nightclub owners?
Rael made a nightclub owner, whose name is Gabriel, who runs Lux. I made a character named Axel, who is a gangrel, who runs the punk venue, the Snake Pit.
So you're like subtly trying to destroy each other's businesses?
Oh no, we're a codier. We work together. It's just, on the outside we've got these two different sides of the same coin. I've got like the degenerates and the junkies and the punk kids and the everything in that area, and then Rael's got the upper management, the prim and proper people of the city going to his establishment.
I feel like that word is pronounced coterie. Not sure though.
Coterie. Well, I can't pronounce many things normally anyway, but you just got this aspect like, well, these are vampires. They're going to be set up in New York in such a way to make their hunting, something that's not going to show up on, the fucking evening news. Having nightclubs makes perfect sense for a vampire, as it were, because, hey, you've got drunken people wandering into your establishment and they get drunk and then they don't remember the night they had.
You're not wrong.
So I think in that case, having the setting kind of influence what you do with your character is fairly interesting because...
Well, so the thing about that, right, is that you're bringing World of Darkness, and in World of Darkness, the setting is pretty much X city in this year, and that's really easy to build a character around because you don't have to, because the DM is not creating a setting.
Right.
It's kind of hard to, imagine going into a D&D style world, right?
Mm-hmm.
How are you supposed to... Okay, or rather, you're going to a D&D style world, and maybe you have a map. Maybe. But you don't know who the DM has decided is the lord of whatever area. You don't know what each village necessarily does. You have to talk to the DM about that kind of thing, and you have to, figure out what's in his head. And it's way easier to fit a character to setting when the setting is established. It's much easier to make a character in Faerun than in Fantasy World number 5728 that I'm making for the Bard campaign.
Right, which is kind of the premise that we're going with. It's a little bit easier to make a character from an established setting. If you have a setting to work off of, you can influence how that character goes, and you can have places you can pull from for, okay, so example for a Faerun campaign or any kind of established setting, if the DM has put work in ahead of time, you have these various cities you can pull from. So, like, well, my character's from this town on the coast, so they're going to be, have these background skills of being associated with fishing, and they're going to be, strong, well built because they're fishermen. Tan character, this and the other, or if they're from a desert setting, they're going to be, a little bit more resilient to certain effects, to heat, so on and so forth. So having that established setting makes creating a good character a little bit easier, as opposed to just, randomly generating a world and going from there. But it's not without its challenges as well.
Yeah. Yeah, no, there's definitely challenges to be had, like, actually finding out what the nightlife in, I don't know, Santa Fe is like.
Right. I mean, you could also look at it from the perspective of, let's say, not so much World of Darkness, let's say somebody wanted to make a D&D campaign based around, well, simply because I've been playing Assassin's Creed Odyssey, let's say centered around the classical Greece culture. You've got the characters based around that specific setting. Historically, if you're a student of history, you kind of sort of know what you can expect from characters from each individual city-state, as it were.
Sure.
Like a Spartan's going to be a steadfast warrior, laconic in their speaking.
Willing to sell out his entire country for a decent steak.
Not the Spartans.
You and I got to have a talk about Sparta one of these days.
We do have not the classical ideal of the Spartan, as it were.
Right, no, yeah, not the classical ideal of the Spartan.
Actual Spartans, I mean, you did have Nefertiti's with the whole Battle of Thermopylae.
Yeah, and also their tendency to turncoat in return for a decent steak.
Right. And you could, so let's go for that, like, Spartans will be steadfast, honorable warriors in laconic in their speaking, while the Athenians might be more flowery in their speech and so on and so forth, as it were.
Right. And yeah, you can make that argument for sure. And the result of that is a character that's better fit to the setting. You're absolutely right.
And, a character who's better fit for the setting isn't necessarily going to be a good character, but that character has a better chance of becoming a good character.
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. I do think I think that you really need all of these things to come together to make a really great character. You can make a good character with some of these elements, but to make a great character, you really want a unique character. You really want one that fits the setting. You really want one that works with the party dynamic, and you really want one that will be memorable, really.
Right.
Yeah. I think if you put all of that together, you end up with something great. Do we have anything to add about how to make a character great? Make these characters great again?
Don't hog the spotlight.
Always hog the spotlight.
Know when to hog the spotlight.
There you go. But that's not really... That's a playstyle thing. We can talk about that in a later episode.
Sort of. I think it can factor in with making a great character because it has to, wind its way into what you're planning to do with your character.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's important to play the character well in order to make it a great character, but I feel like it's a different topic.
Fair enough.
A different topic which we will talk about. But next episode will be party dynamics.
Woo!
Does anyone have anything to add on characters?
I have nothing.
I think I'm good.
Excellent. So, I'd like to thank everybody for watching episode 4 of the podcast. We have hit a new milestone. We've been doing this podcast for 2 months now, guys. And if you want to talk to me about the program today, if you hate the things I've said and think that I need to be told about it, you can find me on Twitter at Padre Luminadre, or you can message me on Twitch TV /Padre Luminadre, which I have just now realized is spelled wrong in our splash page. There is an underscore between Padre and Luminadre. Good job, me. It has been spelled wrong this entire time.
Same goes for me. If you'd like to call me out on anything or just have a discussion, because I like talking to people about things. It's always fun to do so. You can reach me at, twitch.ddkmad, twitchtv.com/ddkmadcat, or at ddkmadcat on the Twitters, various other ways of getting in touch with me if you're some of our established group of people that we know. But reach out. We love talking to people. It's so much fun to do so, to get alternate perspectives on things.
And if you want to be part of the program, you can find me on Discord and just talk to me. We are always looking for new guest stars. We're always looking for new topics of conversation. If you think we need to talk about something, then you let me know, and I will definitely make it happen.
Because at this point, we're pretty much just, referencing what we're going to talk about and deciding, that would make a good topic for the next episode.
Yeah, I mean, we pretty much decided to talk about we pretty much decided what we're going to talk about next episode at the end of the previous episode.
Always fun.
This is a lot of fun. Thank you, guys.
Yeah, thanks for coming on again.
Thanks for joining us, Phoebe.
Yeah.
I will anytime you want me to.
Yeah.
All right, so that's going to be all for tonight, guys. Thank you very much for watching. We will see you all 2 weeks' time, same place. I think. Wait, is 2 weeks from now? Yeah, that'll be the 29th. So, yeah, we'll do it then.
It'll be a thing.
It's going to be delightful.
It's been a thing so far.
It's always a thing. Thanks very much for watching, everybody. Have a good day.
Bye-bye.